one of the issues with kids that have Sanfilippo, at some point, a lot of them lose the ability to swallow, and so to eat or feed themselves. And I would say at a pretty early point, Jessie started having issues chewing her food enough, and so we started pureeing all of her food to prevent choking. And she continued to tolerate that remarkably well up until about the last 6 months of her life. And so we met regularly we had a great GI doctor, and we talked about the possible need in the future for a feeding tube. And I had talked to him about kind of what the signs would be when we decided she needed a feeding tube. So by the time she reached that threshold that we had discussed, other things were starting to decline. And so that was a tough decision, whether we went forward with a G tube, a feeding tube, or to not place a feeding tube. And Matt and I had talked over the years about what that meant to get a feeding tube, and that as parents, you give up a little bit of control in terms of what happens at the end of life. I think that it's very difficult to have a child with a feeding tube and then to say, we're no longer going to use it. And I think that Matt and I had talked about it and felt that that would be a very difficult decision for us, and that it would be easier to say we're not gonna place a feeding tube. As Jessie declined over the last 6 months of her life, we did try an NG tube just temporarily, and it turned out that her stomach wasn't tolerating. It wasn't so much an issue of her swallowing. It was an issue that her stomach wasn't tolerating any feeds, not even water. And so I think that decision was made for us because it didn't make sense to place a feeding tube if her stomach couldn't tolerate it. And so we never really had to make that difficult decision. I feel like she made it for us. But that's a difficult decision for parents. And we talked a lot about it. We met with the doctor to talk about it, and that would have been a difficult decision.